What's going on today, YouTube? So today what we're going to be doing is converting our first app application into a hexagonal architecture. For those of you who don't know what that means, I would recommend going over and watching the if you YouTube Golang hexagonal architecture on YouTube and watch the video by Kat Zien, I think is how you say her name. She goes in depth and explains the benefits of the different types of architecture and why you would maybe want to consider something like a hexagonal approach. So yeah, let's just go and jump right into it. So if we look at our first app application, the way we have it is kind of broken up into different modules, and we have a users module, a routers module, and a database module. Now what we're going to do is going to be a little bit similar, but we're going to break it up into functionality and just kind of abstract our functionality a little bit from our application, from our domain. So if we go into our main application, we can see that the only thing we're doing here is starting the server. Now, starting off inside a hexagonal, what I like to do is just starting a server or setting up the database usually, but let's just go ahead and set up the database first. In here, I have a package name storage. And in there, we're going to want a setup database file or something. In this case, I'm just going to call it storage and MySQL. It's going to be part of the storage package. And what we're going to want to do here is declare a type. Struct. It's going to be of type db sql.db. We actually have to import that, so it works. Also, I already set up my Go mod file. If you don't know what this is, I would suggest going back and looking at my my video on Go modules. And also, some of you guys have requested a Github repository for you guys, and I have done so. Right now it's under my YouTube tutorials repo, and right now I only have my first app. I'll add this first app, Hexagonal, to this after this tutorial. But yeah, so that's all I have set up now is a Go mod file and this sort of file structure. So yeah, let's go here and we'll have a function called setup storage. It's going to return a type of storage or an error or an error. Gosh, I can't really type today. And what we're going to do is db error equals SQL.open. And then the driver is going to be MySQL. And the data source name is just whatever you have. I forgot what we put for that in our last video. It was that. Okay. And then if error not nil, return nil and error. Oops. And we should have a colon there. And if everything seems fine, we want to return the DB. And nil. All right, so this is setting up the connection to our local MySQL server. And what we want to do is set that up inside of our main function. So we do that by doing R and error equals storage dot setup storage if error not nil. Let's just do, I don't like doing the log fatal, so I'm just going to print the error. So now that we have that set up, what do we want to do next? Well, now that we have our storage set up here, we want to pass this storage or repository, whatever you want to call it, instance into our service. And in this case, it's going to be, we're going to be creating an adding service. So let's go ahead and do that. Here it's going to be called adding, well, actually just service.go. And that will be part of the package adding. We're going to have a type service, and it's going to be an interface. And then we're also going to have a type repository that will also be an interface, and another type of service, but will be a struct that takes in a repository. Cool. So right now, we don't have any functions inside of our storage package, or in this case our R here, but we will add that later. So whenever we pass this R to our service, it'll recognize as a repository thanks to the repository interface, and then we can call the functions that are defined within this repository interface. If you're a little confused about what I'm talking about, I made a video on interfaces, so you can go ahead and go back and check that out if you want. So yeah, what do we want to do here? We want to declare a function and call it new service. It's going to take in a repository and return a service. And all we have to do is this. So we're going to call this new service function inside of our main.go file and pass in this repository, and then it'll send the instance of the service with this repository. So now that we have that set up, we can go in here. Right now we have an error because we're not using that. So we do this by calling the adding.new service, and we'll call this AS. Gosh, passing in the repository. And there we go. We have the adding service now. We have access to it. And after that, what do we want to do next? Well, we want to add a handler to our REST API. So I added a package here, or a folder here called REST. And this is where I'm going to have all of my handlers. Package. What should we call that? Let's just call it REST, because it's inside the REST folder. And this this function called handler is going to take in an instance of adding.service and is going to return a chi.mux. Sorry, chi.mux instance. For the router, right? Now you've seen this before in every other Go tutorial using Chi or Gorilla Mux, whatever. We're gonna declare our router chi.new router, and this is where we're gonna start adding all of our endpoints. So for here, let's do users / users actually. And now let's do API / users. Why not? And then handle users. Or you know what? Let's do handle adding to follow this hexagonal approach. It's going to be some random function that we get. And we're going to pass in this adding service. So once we do that, we want to just return the router. Now this isn't made yet, so I could make it in here, or I could, so later on, you're going to have a bunch of different handlers, and you're going to have a handler for adding, deleting, updating, whatever other functionality you want your application to have. So let's just go ahead and start off on the right foot and call this handle adding.go. Package REST. And now in here, if you watch my other videos, it is common practice and just good to have a handler function that returns an empty function. So if we go back here, we see that we're passing in the adding service to this handle adding. So we're going to define that here, as adding.service. And it's going to return a func of w.http writer, response writer, and then h pointer http dot request. So let's go ahead and do that. Response writer http dot request. Sorry, this needs to be an R. This needs to be an R. There we go. All right, so now everything should be working. We have this adding service that we want to pass into our handler. Let me close this up so everything's a little bit neater. We have this adding service, and we're also going to have a deleting, updating, and authenticating whatever other service we want here that we're going to eventually have to pass into our handler. So we do that by doing this. Call our handler function and pass in our adding service. And boom. So now our handler has an instance of our adding service, and we can access anything inside that adding service, and therefore our repository as well, whenever we want. Did I make sure? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, and then after we do that, after we instantiate our handler and our router, we can now start listening. Sorry, not fat fatal. And HTTP. Gosh. Dot listen and serve. And let's just do port 8080 and pass in our router. And we can also put a little message here. I don't know why I capitalized that. Port 8080. Cool. So this is kind of how the flow is going to go. Whenever you want to add a new service, this is what you're going to do. You're going to create a package here, and inside it's going to have a service.go file. And they're going to look very similar. You're going to have a service interface. You're going to have a repository interface and a service struct inside of each one of those packages. So now let me show you this in action. So real quick, I noticed that my Go mod file was a little messed up because I have two projects in here and I accidentally created it inside of the wrong directory. But now we have it inside of our app, and our imports are all situated, so everything is good to go. And I did run a quick test to make sure everything was working. And as you can see, SQL connection is already closed. All right, so there was an error, but that was with our SQL connection. We'll have to check that out. But really, this is how you set up the hexagonal architecture within Go versus the modular setup. So yeah, the way the application works is usually inside of these functional packages, you'll have your own models. So let's say you have an adding package, a removing package, and an updating package. You'll have a user's model within each one of those. That way, if let's say you're adding a user, you have more fields that are required to adding a user than reading a user. You can do that. And yeah, so let's go through the application step by step just to make sure it really sticks in your head. What we normally do first is we initialize some sort of database reference, and then we pass it into some sort of service. In this case, it's an adding service. And once we have that service, we pass it into our router, we add it to our handlers, all of our handlers, specifically the ones that handle adding within our application, and then we run the application. So let's say you wanted to make a endpoint, a new endpoint. In this case, yeah, we will add all of our endpoints inside of this handler.go file. And this doesn't make much sense now that I look at it, since it is we're adding users. We're gonna want to make this a post endpoint, not a get. But theoretically, let's say you're adding a get request to users. It's going to be handle reading, right? So you'll make a new file here called handle reading, and the idea is you want everything to be grouped up as neat as possible, so it's easier for you and future developers to navigate through your code and understand what it does just by looking at its file structure and not having to decipher through any sort of logic. So just by looking at this application, I already know that it's a REST service. It has some sort of storage, and this is where all the functionality for the adding goes, at least the service. And this is where all of my handlers are, and this is where I initialize and set up my databases. So yeah, it's really nice to work with. You'll have to add more. You'll have to really work with this for a while for it to really sink in, but once it does, it's really enjoyable. I personally enjoy it, and like I said, I use it for my own personal projects. But yeah, this is how you set up a hexagonal architecture project using Go. So yeah, sorry if this video was a little bit complicated. I didn't want to make it too long. Just a quick little easy guide for people to jump in that are just now starting off with hexagonal architecture. Hopefully in the future I might do like a more in-depth tutorial. But like I said, I'm just trying to keep this as short as possible. But yeah, if you liked the video, give a like, subscribe, and comment down below if you'd like to see anything. Also, like I said, a lot of people have been asking for a GitHub repository, so here it is. If you go to my GitHub, you'll see it there. It's under YouTube tutorials, and here is the first application that we worked on in the past few tutorials, and here's the one we worked on today. So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys next time. Like, subscribe, share. See you next time.